1990s, I had a student, brilliant graduate student at Mass College of Art and Design, named Carl Poirot. And this kid was amazing. He was so amazing that he got an immediate part-time job as the exhibition designer for the Big Dig, the biggest public building project in America ever at that point in time. And he was also my graduate student. And he would bring us projects, and we did 2- and 3-dimensional projects to school with this crazy contraption he made on the back of this bicycle made entirely out of cardboard. And it was elegant, and it was light, and it had, you know, Velcro, fasteners and stuff. I said, Carl, where did you learn to do this? And he said, I studied at the University of Buffalo with Harold Cohen. And I said, what? Harold Cohen, is he still alive? I had no idea. You know, he's a World War II vet, not too many of those left. He said, Harold Cohen, no kidding. And he says, yeah, and you know something? You remind me of Harold Cohen in the way you teach. I said, well, thank you. So that's one story. Another story, I heard there was going to be an exhibition in Chicago. And Susan, this was 2009. My wife and editor's at the back. She'll be selling the books later. And so she encouraged me to go, and I went. Bucky Fuller's work. And while I was there, I stepped out of the elevator and I heard someone say, you know how Bucky got to Carbondale, didn't you? A place I will explain in a minute. And the other guy says, no, how? And he said, Harold Cohen brought him. At that moment, I knew I was going to write this book. One more quick story. I'm at SIU, fall of 1955, ready to go into advertising. I'd studied it for 2 years. That's what they called it then, advertising art. I had on really well-tailored clothes. I wanted to look like one of these slender, handsome designers with a sports car and a wife starved to near perfection, and all this stuff, you know? And I was studying advertising, and I was stuck in class in the basement of the Allen building. All the desks were gone. There were just tables and chairs. And I was in a sophomore class, and I was a junior. I couldn't understand this. In walks this guy, a bit younger, and he had on this really shiny black suit. And the first thing he did was take off his suit coat and said, see this? He said, last night I washed this out by hand and hung it up in a hanger over the tub to dry. There's a whole new field of synthetics. It's changing our lives. I looked at the suit, I listened to the New York accent, and I thought, let me out of here. I'm not going to learn anything about advertising about this guy. That part is true. And then he handed us all 5 of us, a handful of soda straws and a brick each. And he said, you've got, I forget what the time was, it was a short time, it was like an hour, hour and a half, to support this brick, 12 inches above the tabletop, no tape, no glue, no rubber bands, nothing. I said, excuse me, Mr. Cohen, the straws are only 8 inches long. He says, exactly. Okay, I can tell you, I'd worked in the shipyards, I knew a little bit about triangles and stuff, so thank God I recalled it, mine held up. That was a shock to my system, and shocks is when we change. Everyone I interviewed for this book has said, from the day they met Harold, their lives were changed radically. And we've got several here. Roger Van Dam, will you raise your hand? Roger had the same experience. Jerry Kinsman, raise your hand. Had the same experience. John Biz, same experience. And a man doing some video over here who didn't know Harold because he came after Harold left. And this is Lakota is your last name?
Michael Dakota.
Michael Dakota, thank you. Who drove all the way from New York to film this. So, now we'll start. It was pretty audacious to state that this was the second American Bauhaus, and several people told me so. Let's see if I can prove the point. The Bauhaus, some of you know about it, so I'll be very brief. Started in Weimar, Germany in 1919. Walter Gropius founded it. It was a state school. Germany had been devastated by World War I. You needed a bushel barrel of marks Deutsche marks in order to buy a loaf of bread. Things were terrible. And the local, rather liberal municipality of Weimar decided to start a school that could design housing and objects that would be highly affordable. Imagine it today that you could buy these at Target or Kmart, Walmart, excuse me. That was the idea, that it would be inexpensive, functional stuff without decoration. So that was their goal. One of the people at the Bauhaus was László Moholy-Nagy. You see him here at the top. And this is Harold Cohen in about 1955-56. And a couple people you meet later, Dwight Morris, president of Southern Illinois University, and Buckminster Fuller. This book is about how these four men and their shared vision changed the way we look at design, and how the things they did at this totally unknown college in a totally economically devastated part of Illinois, jokingly called Lower Illinois by the students from Chicago, changed design in America and was an extension of Moholy's best ideas for the Bauhaus. This is a photo of Moholy that his daughter let me use. If you know his book, Vision in Motion, you can see Moholy thinking, yeah, I will do this. Vision in Motion pose. It's a self-portrait, by the way. This is the logo for the original Bauhaus in Weimar. And the Bauhaus moved from Weimar to Dessau, and then briefly to Berlin before it was dissolved in 1933. Hitler didn't like the socialists and the Jews in the Bauhaus, so they had to flee. And we certainly benefited in America. Walter Gropius, the founder, went first to London, as did Moholy. Walter Gropius came to Boston in 1939 and was appointed head of the architecture program at Harvard University. He didn't do a lot at Harvard because Harvard doesn't let anyone do new stuff. One building, Harkness Hall, but he founded the Architects Collaborative and went on to build many, many important schools, in particular in New England. Where the Bauhaus flourished in America and got its muscle was Chicago. Chicago, the town of the big corporations with big hearts and deep pockets. The first founder, supporter of Moholy's idea of a new Bauhaus in Chicago was the Armour Packing Company. And later on, he was supported by the Container Corporation of America, and they hold the patent on corrugated boards, so you can imagine how rich they are. They also founded the Espen Design Institute and all kinds of things. This is Harold, right after he got out of the service. He served on a destroyer escort in World War II. And this is his parents. I think they ran a fish market, did they not? And here's a picture of Harold at his graduation from the Institute of Design in 1949. So there's Harold, not surprisingly standing next to the director, Sergei Chermayeff. And this man you'll meet later, Davis Pratt, who was also at the Institute of Design and was a partner with Harold, as he says, in this furniture company they had. And his later wife, Ilsa Kula. Davis was about 6'4" or 5", and his wife was about that tall. So they made quite a couple. I once saw them jitterbugging. It was a delight. Oh yeah, and this guy, who gets all the press, Buckminster Fuller. Everyone in the world knows who Bucky Fuller is. He was on a postage stamp. He was nominated for a Nobel Prize. He was on the cover of Time magazine. No one, except in Buffalo and a few students, remember Harold Cohen, and this book is about to change that. So, Chicago to Carbondale. Here's the Davis Pratt and Harold Cohen. This chair, I don't know if it's this very chair, but it was a chair that was designed, that won an award at MoMA in New York. And here is, I don't know why Harold's not in this picture. Did you design that together?
Not yet.
That one. So there's Davis Pratt. And there's some heavies in this picture. He's sitting next to Charles Eames, Alexei Brodovich. I don't know some of the others, but I'm sure that Harold is. So this was a very prestigious event. They turned out great stuff, didn't charge enough, and the business didn't last. Harold has told you about his teaching at the Institute of Design and how he quit when they were being merged with IIT, so I won't go into that too much, except that he had a vision about something he wanted to do, which is namely to carry on Maholi's concept. Maholi realized, once he got to Chicago, that the Bauhaus had never integrated itself with all the ologies, sociology, psychology, all of these sciences that would make a person a broader individual and not strictly a designer that turned out products. Couldn't do that at the Institute of Design, it didn't have the money. And IIT wasn't doing much of it at that particular time. And so Harold stuck his neck out, objected to the new director of the ID, and got himself fired. Lucky for all of us that happened. I've been fired a few times, it's sometimes very fruitful. And he ended up in Carbondale. Here's Harold in a class. This wasn't my particular class. This looks like higher than 12 inches. My God, I'm glad we didn't get this assignment. But you can see how involved Harold was. You know, he really sat back and watched them fail. But he actually showed us a few tricks the day we did it in class. Harold, very quickly, Harold and Mary both, very quickly, and by the way, Mary has been a strong helpmate, more than a helpmate. She's his editor, keeps him straight. I'm lucky enough to have a wife just like Mary Susan, who's there at the back. So he made friends with people outside of the art and design department right away. This is George Kimball Plotman, all right? They're strategizing late at night outside of the so-called Design Shack, a temporary building. And I love this almost the thinker kind of pose. It looks like you guys are in some heavy, heavy conversation. So, when I interviewed Harold in Buffalo the first time, I asked him, Harold, what do you consider your greatest contributions when you were founded the design department in Carbondale? Here he is, by the way, in his office in Carbondale. And this is Delight Morris, the president of Southern Illinois University, an extremely visionary man on his own, who was very interested in design for the handicapped. His master's degree was in speech therapy. And he also had grandiose ideas for what had been this little state teachers college. So that matched his vision, and later on Bucky came, but we'll get to that later. So Harold jumps right in. Yes, he's got a design program. Let's do stuff in the community. Let's do real stuff as well, not just theoretical stuff. There was a camp in Carbondale at Little Grassy Lake for handicapped children. Easter seal stuff, I think, Harold, having to do with polio. And they needed some new structures, so Harold and his students designed some new tents. And Roger Van Dam, who's sitting right here in the audience, raise your hand, Roger, was there to help on this particular project. Here's the model of the tents. And this is Roger. He's changed a bit. And Harold, he's changed a bit. So Harold got his hands dirty. He got out there and worked with the students to get things done. And boy, does it get hot in Carbondale. I never see anyone in these pictures with their shirts on. This is an aerial view of the actual camp. Some say that this project, not just the tents, but the camp for the handicapped children, gave rise to the idea of the whole Disability Act and the idea of doing things for the handicapped. And there's some proof that that may have been the case. I forgot the gentleman's name that did all this, Harold.
The doctor in Chicago, the neurosurgeon.
Yeah. They also started building stuff right away. way. So this was not a quiet little group of designers in the basement of the art building. Harold had a small budget, but he invited famous designers. This is Alex Candela's structure in the background. He was a Mexican architect that worked a lot with stress concrete. And in the foreground, you see a dome project, which was completed in, I think, in 1962, which became a temporary classroom. This is the wood dome. And Jerry Kinsman, who is here. Jerry, raise your hand. Raise your hand, Jerry. Jerry, come on. Jerry climbed to the top of this thing. You'll see another slide in a minute. When a mistake was made, not to put one of the structures in. Here's Harold teaching in this dome. A picture, daytime picture of it. This was taken by Koike, by the way. All these beautiful shots. So, Harold also, and his group, got the idea of inventing, you've heard of better mousetrap? This was a better cage for experimental animals. And they did their homework. They found out that the curved teeth of rodents would not allow them to cut through a loop of fiber that was parabolic. The teeth was curved, the loop was curved. That allowed them to have basically a diaper inside of the container so the urine could go through and the cage could remain much cleaner, and these for laboratory animals. This was patented. It's still for sale, I understand. So they actually made some money from the school. There's a very quick description of it. Okay, in 1954, Harold got a call from Bucky Fuller, who was living then in Forest Hills, New York. And Bucky said, "Oh my God, we've had a fire in my place. It's destroyed most of my slides and models. And we're running out of money." They were living on his wife's trust fund. "And what am I going to do?" And Harold said, "Hang on, I'll talk to the president of Southern Illinois University and maybe we can get you a gig of some kind." He was able to talk President Morris into inviting Buckminster Fuller for a 6-week session in the summer. Bucky came. Roger Van Dam, who's back there, was actually in Bucky's workshop that summer, right, Roger? And it was a very difficult time. Bucky spoke. He gives one talk. It starts with "The Beginning of Mankind," it ends with "Now." And so they're very, very long. But they also learned how to calculate the stresses for these domes. They learned the math. And so they planned them. How many of you have seen the Monk series on TV? Well, this is Bucky trying to be one of the guys like Monk. He's having a hot dog. You can see he's really enjoying it. Now let's talk a little bit about Morris. Morris was an entrepreneur. Got his own budget at SIU Carbondale, so he didn't have to compete with all the other state schools. When he wanted something done, he put together this great slideshow, which was put together by one of Harold's students, and hopped on one of his 2 Beechcraft aircrafts and flew up to Springfield, the state capital, wowed the legislators, and usually came back with the money. He was a stylish chap. These are the official stupid overbred dogs, the Salukis, that are the mascots of SIU Carbondale. And Harold is not in this picture, but he often flew with Morris to Springfield. While they were in, when Bucky first came to Carbondale, by the way, it was his first and only permanent academic appointment. And he suddenly was on the map. People who wouldn't listen to him before, except for a very brief lecture, suddenly took him more seriously. And he began to have time to write. And Mary Cohen edited his almost totally undecipherable prose on this book, No More Secondhand God, and got it published by the SIU Press. Here's President Morris and Bucky planning. So, back to this question to Harold. Harold, what were your greatest accomplishments at SIU Carbondale? He said, establishing the design department. I'm adding the next two. He brought the world to Carbondale in two ways. He brought all these important speakers to this school. He hired faculty from Chicago, from the Institute of Design in Chicago. He brought some students with him. He hired faculty members from New York. He brought us a level of international sophistication that the school itself could not afford. And he was backed by President Morris in doing so. He established early what I'm calling an International Design Corps. You had a different name for it, which became an idea that influenced the formation of the Peace Corps. He started a whole new method of teaching called the experimental freshman year, where students in high schools who finished in the lower third of their graduating class, who couldn't normally get into college, would be accepted in this special program. And with special work in a particular environment, Mary took a year off and helped them with that, and they worked on it, and it was a big, big success. It changed people's lives. All of this is in the book, by the way, in case you forget it. And that course was not refunded the second year by the university because of some jealous profs who didn't have that money. But Harold carried that idea. He's kind of unstoppable. Have you noticed? When this course was not refunded, he decided to, what the hell, I will form a course with some of the same ideas that students at SIU can take as an elective, 3 electives, for everyone at the university. History of art, history of music, or this design course, which was the creativity course we're calling a GSE 205. That course, set up and first taught by Harold. And Roger, you might have taught one of these sections or helped with it, I'm not sure. No?
I was not.
This was taught for 35 years at SIU, reached a total of 50,000 students. Very few of them became designers as we normally would think of it, but it made them empowered, that they knew they could change the world through their ideas. Great contribution. He also thought up design missions, first of all in Africa. They didn't happen right away. Later in Thailand, so that in 1968, I believe, Davis Pratt and his wife also went to Thailand and founded some design schools there. And of course, he brought Bucky to Carbondale. That's quite a lot. You were there, what, 12 years? 8 years, okay. It just seemed like 12. Oh, here's a little timeline just to prove one of my points. This was done by Herb Meyer, who's a wonderful researcher and worked with Harold on many of his projects. I'm going to turn this on its side now because what I want you to follow is the conceptualization of the Peace Corps and IDO, International Design Organization thinking. This is way back in the late 50s. JFK is running for president, so a lot of this coincides with that. So if you read up from the bottom, Harold was working on projects in Africa. Ideas invited people over from, I believe, Nigeria. Helen Burgett, who was from South Africa, was working with them. And so you can follow this right up and you see that by the time Kennedy became president and the Peace Corps was founded, that these ideas began to take place. We cannot say it's a fact that Harold's influence started the Peace Corps. I'm not claiming that. I'm saying that these ideas of design that would be international was something that the students all believed. And one of the advisors, Winifred, I forget her last name now, admitted that she had seen the SIU proposals that Harold and Herb Meyer carried to Washington, and that did influence the forming of the Peace Corps. This is Ilse Kula, that diminutive woman, the wife of Davis Pratt. Harold got them to come and teach at Carbondale. Here's Davis with his students. This is the way the design department looked when I returned in 1959, when they were in the second floor of the library. That's Davis. This is Herb Rohn, one of the designers who also, did he teach at the ID or he just a student? No, not. Harold nabbed him from New York. We had all these New Yorkers. Harold's a New Yorker. Herb Rohn was a New Yorker. I think Ilse was originally from New York, was she not? And he was a very sophisticated graphic designer, extremely colorful teacher. So Harold is the paper folding man. He believed and still believes that if you can work it out folding paper, it'll work in other materials. Structurally, we know that's true. So here's some temporary housing they were developing, I believe, for Africa. He got a big grant from the Alton Boxboard Company, a baby Container Corporation of America, and they got a huge amount of cardboard, so they began designing and assembling housing that could be put up in a hurry. You can imagine this working in Haiti or after Katrina and things like that, if the cardboard was made waterproof. Once again, Harold's right out there working with them. And these are barracks buildings in the background, which the design department moved into. More about them later. Okay, I was there this day. This is the day in 1959, after Buckminster Fuller had been named no longer just a visiting professor, but research professor at SIU Carbondale. We were told this great man was coming. I had no idea what he looked like, never heard of Bucky Fuller. I expected another tall, thin, handsome designer. This guy comes walking in. I'm in the room, but not in the shot. I looked a little bit like this. Bucky started with The Beginning of Mankind, ended with Now. It took 6 hours. We used up all the film in the town. There was no more film at the local drugstore. And he took not one drink of water and never went to the bathroom. But I listened, and my life was changed by what he said. He said, there's enough to go around. We don't have to worry about resources if we use them properly. The ocean's not a barrier. It's a mine of so many trillion cubic miles of saline solution that has all the chemical elements in it. And he first talked about the earth and our, way before we were talking about ecology. I was then a Southern Baptist and an evangelist. I'm an evangelist still for his ideas and Harold's ideas in design. Well, Bucky was in heaven in Carbondale. You know, here he was as a university professor, got himself into all the societies he could, had his dome home built, which is being restored now. And you can see him posing outside. He's in Nirvana. This is Bucky with Morris, in the publication of his first book, No Secondhand God, which the University Press refused to publish it first, and President Morris published it with his own funds. So Morris was part of this plan that Harold talked about earlier. And let's talk about that briefly. Harold was allowed to enter the back door of President Morris's house anytime he wanted to have breakfast or lunch and to talk. Morris knew that Harold would deliver. Whatever budget he gave him, something would happen. Naturally, Harold's in all the newspapers, his students are in the newspapers. Have you ever noticed around colleges, like other people, there are petty minds? If one person gets famous, the other faculty get sort of snarly about it. So this was good for the design department, but sometimes not so good for feelings on campus. This guy was also hired by Harold. This is Harold Brzezowski. He was he your student actually at the Institute of Design? He's the one that taught that GSC 205 course for so many years in Carbondale. And this man, John McHale, Harold and Mary encountered in England, and Harold brought him over. He was a major art and design critic and a designer himself, invented the term pop art. He came to SIU Carbondale. He wrote a lot of stuff with and for Bucky Fuller. And this is Rainier Bannon, who some of you might remember. I understand he was later here at Buffalo. And he has some comments in the book, which I will paraphrase later on. This is a project in East St. Louis. I'm from East St. Louis, Illinois, which is a very impoverished city. Then it was much stronger. And Harold helped organize this organization, this conference. There he is, President Morris. Okay, this is the design complex at Carbondale. And I have some t-shirts with me for alums who haven't received them, excuse me, only for alums or their wives. They had a barracks, 2 domes, a barracks, the space in between. This was something the students built, barracks, domes, barracks. So, one of the alums developed this emoticon, which is on the t-shirts, which picks up this idea. This is Herb Meyer, who was so important in a lot of this material. He didn't design the emoticon, but much of the research, and he designed the space between. He used Homer soap. Homer soap, guys. You know, this stuff soaks up water like an egg carton would for the roof, and it still worked because they waterproofed it. So the design department, by the way, it was on the edge of campus. They had 24-hour access, so they could really get stuff done. Here's Harold and Mary in the office, early on. Ah yes, when Harold did the experimental year, freshman year, he put Harold Brzezowski and Davis Pratt in charge, and they were as different in personalities as these cartoons show. We'll get to them later. This is the only slide anyone has that I know about of Bucky Fuller listening to someone else talk. There he is, and here's Harold, and it looks like he's actually listening. This is some of the classroom setup in the experimental freshman year. Second floor of the student union. Students had a jukebox, there was theme stuff all around. Here's Mary lecturing. They set up a telephone line so the students could listen to and talk to famous designers and people that they couldn't bring. Here's Harold teaching. Stephen Poster, who was a student in that experimental design year. And this is a few shots of the GSC 205 class. Harold teaching it. And when Harold left SIU to go to the IBR, Institute of Behavioral Research in Maryland, he again put Harold Brzezowski and Davis Pratt in charge. This is that dome I told you about, and Jerry Kinsman helped build, and he put in this section up here. He was the only guy with guts enough to climb up and put it in. There was no OSHA then. Can you imagine a university letting students build something like that now? This is Harold Brzezowski teaching that class. By now he's the 70s. Another great thing at SIU, which Harold had nothing to do with it actually doing, but Herbert Rohn did, was Vision 65, a major international conference in Carbondale. Everyone could afford it. That changed the thinking. There was no internet. People didn't know this stuff at that time. It was very well attended. International speakers all over the world. I was there. I visited that. Here's Herb Rohn, along with Will Burton, a famous designer from New York, who helped plan the conference. So I mentioned that Ilse Kuhl and Davis Pratt went to Thailand to found some new design programs. There they are with the king of Thailand. Here is Ilse showing the Thai students some graphic design work. This is the team they worked with while there. And I have a former graduate student in Thailand who told me that there now is a design program in Chiang Mai. So the beat goes on. Where does the beat go on? It goes on, not so much at SIU, but in Buffalo. Surprise, surprise. John Biss, who is here. John, you said this in your interview, said that some of the things that Harold Cohen has done here at Buffalo remind him of the best days at SIU. Some of the ideas and teaching methods. So you folks are the recipients of a continuation. Now here's some other people that are continuing. This is the work of Larry Bush, who also taught that creativity course at Southern when Harold Grozowski died. He designed these carols for junior high school and elementary school children. He made Life magazine. It's his master's thesis. He still is a consultant throughout the United States doing this kind of work, plus interesting problem-solving projects like smashing tomatoes and doing impossible tasks with soda straws. Joe Eddie Brown, who teaches up near Chicago, doing the same thing, carrying an idea on. These two guys are live wires. They're still doing it here. And Harold didn't do so bad. I guess this is you in Buffalo, right? You know, he looks pretty good. He weathered all this stuff. This is Harold coming back at the Carbondale in 1978. He's there with Davis Pratt and with Dave Miles, a brilliant young man who was a grad student, got his PhD there. Here's Harold and Ann Fuller, Bucky's wife. Here's Mary, Ann and Bucky. And here's something, Harold put his papers in the rare books collection at SIU Carbondale. And many, many tributes. Bucky, this is important. Bucky did this thing after he left Carbondale. He did this chart of his life. And right here, see this arrow? He's showing, this is when he met Harold and Mary in Chicago at the Institute of Design. And this is how his own life took off in terms of things he achieved. And here's a blow-up of it. Harold and Mary Cohen, who entered into my life and have had a intimate part in the visions of the, I can't read it all. Bucky's handwriting was hard to decipher. This is John Biss, who's here. And this is John when he was a student at SIU. This is the t-shirt. Okay, this is one project I did that I was really influenced by SIU design. Don't forget I was a Flatlander graphic designer. Then I had these projects. I had young children that kept losing their toys day after Christmas, losing the pieces. So I designed this, which was a musical toy. You couldn't lose it. The blocks could be moved. It would teach color, tone, musical scale. That's my 4-year-old daughter. And it was nearly patented and produced. Ironically, I got interested in letterpress printing at Carbondale and still teach it. In fact, my class, my second class, met today at Mass College of Art. And this is the final slide. This is Harold and Mary in their, what I call penthouse. And they're wonderful hosts and cooks. Their students, touchingly, throughout the world, have stayed in contact with them, and they've stayed in contact with them. And this isn't just, yeah, you're a nice guy. Their lives have been changed. So, Harold, I congratulate you. Dean Shibley, thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. University of Buffalo, you're doing a great job. Keep it up.